May 23rd, 1998, nursing student Samantha Ward asked strangers for gas money at a Texas dance hall. She walked to her car alone at 11:45 p.m. and vanished forever. 20 years later, investigators would discover something horrifying hidden in her abandoned vehicle. This is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about trust, about safety, and about how quickly a normal Saturday night can transform into a nightmare that spans 2 decades. But before we reveal what investigators found in that car 20 years later, we need to understand who Samantha Ward really was and why her disappearance made absolutely no sense to anyone who knew her. The Wild West Saloon sat like a neon oasis on the dark outskirts of Beaumont, Texas. Every Saturday night, this sprawling honky-tonk drew line dancing enthusiasts from 3 counties, their pickup trucks and sedans filling a parking lot that stretched nearly 2 acres under flickering sodium lights. On May 23rd, 1998, the lot was packed as usual. Couples in matching Western shirts headed inside for an evening of two-stepping and cold beer, their laughter echoing across the humid East Texas air. Samantha Ward arrived at 9:47 p.m., parking her white 1995 Honda Civic in a space near the back of the lot. But unlike the other customers streaming toward the entrance, Samantha wasn't here to dance. She was here because she was desperate. At 23, Samantha was just 3 weeks away from graduating nursing school at Lamar University. 4 years of brutal studying, 12-hour clinical rotations, and working part-time jobs to pay for textbooks and rent were finally about to pay off. She had already received a conditional job offer from Houston Methodist Hospital, contingent on passing her state licensing exam. But tonight, all of that felt impossibly far away. Tonight, Samantha had a much more immediate problem. She opened her worn leather wallet and counted the contents one more time, hoping against hope that she'd somehow miscounted. $11.37. She needed at least $20 for gas to get home to her apartment 15 miles away. Her fuel gauge had been hovering dangerously close to empty for 2 days. She'd been putting off buying gas, knowing that every dollar spent on fuel meant another meal of ramen noodles instead of real food. But here's what made Samantha's situation particularly puzzling. Why had she driven to the Wild West Saloon at all if she barely had enough gas to get there? The answer to that question would prove to be more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Her roommate, Jennifer Chen, would later tell investigators that Samantha had received a phone call around 8:30 that evening. The caller claimed to represent a prestigious Dallas medical center and said they had a lucrative job opportunity that might interest a soon-to-be nursing graduate. The person on the phone had specifically requested that Samantha meet them at the Wild West Saloon to discuss the position. They claimed to be interviewing several candidates that night at the club because it was a convenient location between Dallas and Houston. Jennifer thought the whole thing sounded suspicious, but Samantha was intrigued. Jobs at Dallas medical centers paid significantly more than positions in smaller Texas cities, and the financial pressure of nursing school had been overwhelming. What Samantha didn't know was that when police later tried to trace that phone call, they would discover something chilling. The number that appeared on her caller ID belonged to a payphone at a truck stop that had been disconnected for maintenance 3 days before the call was supposedly made. Someone had deliberately lured Samantha Ward to the Wild West Saloon that night. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's first understand exactly what happened inside that club, because the security footage would provide crucial clues that investigators wouldn't fully understand for 20 years. Samantha entered the Wild West Saloon at 9:52 p.m., and immediately it was obvious to everyone watching that she wasn't a typical customer. While other patrons headed straight for the bar or the dance floor, Samantha stood nervously near the entrance, scanning the crowd with an expression of growing anxiety. The bouncer, Marcus Williams, would remember her vividly 2 decades later. She kept checking her watch and looking around like she was supposed to meet someone, he told investigators in 2018. But she also seemed scared, like she was having second thoughts about being there. For nearly an hour, Samantha waited near the entrance, occasionally checking her phone and growing visibly more agitated. Security cameras captured her approaching the bartender twice, apparently asking if anyone had left a message for her. But no one had. By 10:45 p.m., it was clear that whoever had asked her to meet them at the club wasn't coming. And that's when Samantha's evening took a turn that would seal her fate. She began approaching other customers, asking for help with gas money. Now, this wasn't unusual behavior at honky-tonks in East Texas. Plenty of young people found themselves short on cash after a night out, and most patrons were sympathetic to someone who just needed a few dollars to get home safely. But Samantha's approach was different. She wasn't embarrassed or apologetic. She was methodical, almost businesslike, as if she had transformed her desperation into a systematic plan. "Excuse me, I'm really sorry to bother you," she would begin, according to multiple witnesses who spoke to police weeks later. "I'm a nursing student and I'm completely broke. I just need a few dollars for gas to get home safely. I'll give you my address and pay you back tomorrow, I promise." Most people were generous. A young couple gave her $3. A group of oil field workers handed her a $5 bill and told her to keep it. An older woman pressed $10 into her hand and wished her luck with nursing school. But even with these contributions, Samantha was still short of what she needed. The security cameras captured her checking her wallet repeatedly, counting and recounting the money with increasing anxiety. And that's when she noticed them. At 11:15 p.m., Samantha approached a corner table where an older couple sat nursing their drinks and quietly observing the line dancers. Even in the dim lighting of the club, it was obvious that these two were different from the usual Wild West saloon crowd. They appeared to be in their 50s or early 60s, dressed conservatively in pressed slacks and button-down shirts. They weren't dancing, weren't socializing with other customers, and seemed to be watching everything with the careful attention of people who didn't quite belong in this environment. Several witnesses would later describe the conversation between Samantha and this mysterious couple as oddly intense. It lasted nearly 15 minutes, much longer than any of Samantha's other interactions that night. Security footage shows animated gesturing from all three parties. At one point, the woman appeared to be writing something on a napkin. The man seemed to be asking Samantha detailed questions, and she was providing lengthy responses. One nearby customer, Maria Santos, overheard fragments of the conversation that would prove crucial to the investigation. "I heard the man say something about helping nursing students get started in their careers," she told police in 2018. "And the woman mentioned something about their daughter being in medical school too." But it was what Maria Santos heard next that would send chills down investigators' spines 20 years later. The woman asked Samantha about her family situation, Santos recalled. She wanted to know if Samantha lived alone, if she had close family nearby, if anyone would be worried if she didn't come home that night. These weren't the kind of questions you'd expect from people offering to help with gas money. These were the questions of predators assessing their target. At 11:28 p.m., after nearly 15 minutes of conversation, Samantha shook hands with both people and headed toward the exit. The security camera by the front door captured her leaving at exactly 11:45 p.m., walking purposefully toward the parking lot. In her hand, she carried what appeared to be money and a folded piece of paper. She looked relieved. She looked hopeful. She looked like a young woman who had solved her immediate problem and was ready to drive safely home to her apartment, in her textbooks, and her dreams of becoming a registered nurse. But Samantha Ward would never make it home. And here's the detail that would baffle investigators for 2 decades. Samantha never reached her car that night, even though it was parked less than 50 yards from the club's entrance. The parking lot security camera had malfunctioned earlier that day, creating a crucial blind spot that covered the exact area where Samantha's Honda Civic was parked. This technical failure would prove to be either an incredible coincidence or evidence of careful planning by someone who understood the club's security systems. When the Wild West Saloon closed at 2 a.m., security guard Mike Torres made his usual rounds of the parking lot. He noticed the white Honda Civic still sitting in its original space, but assumed the owner had either gotten a ride home with friends or decided to sleep off a few drinks before driving. This was a reasonable assumption. Torres had worked security at the club for 5 years and had seen countless customers make responsible decisions about not driving after drinking. But Samantha Ward hadn't been drinking that night. The bartender confirmed that she never ordered a single alcoholic beverage. Sunday morning brought no change. The Honda remained untouched in its parking space, and by Sunday evening, club management contacted the Beaumont Police Department to report an abandoned vehicle. Officer Patricia Gonzalez arrived at 6:30 p.m. and ran the license plate through the system. The car was registered to Samantha Ward, age 23, with an address on College Street in Beaumont. Gonzalez drove to Samantha's apartment complex for a routine welfare check. That's when the case took its first ominous turn. Samantha's roommate, Jennifer Chen, answered the door, and it was immediately obvious that she had been crying. Samantha hadn't come home Saturday night, hadn't called, and wasn't answering her phone. "This isn't like her at all," Jennifer told Officer Gonzalez. "Samantha is the most responsible person I know. She studies every night, she never goes out partying, and she always calls if she's going to be late." Jennifer explained that Samantha had left the apartment around 8:45 p.m. on Saturday, claiming she had a job interview meeting at the Wild West Saloon. She was supposed to be home by midnight at the latest because she had clinical rotations starting at 6 a.m. on Monday. But midnight had come and gone, so had Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and now Sunday evening. The initial police response was unfortunately typical for missing person cases involving young adults. The assumption was that Samantha had met someone at the club, made an impulsive decision to spend the night elsewhere, and would turn up within 48 hours with an embarrassing explanation. But Detective Ray Kowalski, a 15-year veteran who specialized in complex disappearances, sensed that this case was different. On Monday morning, Detective Kowalski arranged for Samantha's Honda Civic to be towed to the police impound facility for processing. What investigators found inside the car would transform a routine missing person case into something far more sinister. The car keys were missing, Samantha's purse was gone, but most significantly, the driver's seat had been moved forward nearly 4 inches from its original position. Samantha Ward was 5 feet 2 inches tall and always adjusted her seat close to the pedals so she could comfortably reach everything. Jennifer Chen confirmed this when she accompanied investigators to examine the car. "Samantha is tiny," Jennifer explained. "She always has to pull the seat way forward to drive. Whoever moved this seat is much taller than she is." The current seat position would accommodate someone at least 5 feet 8 inches tall. Either Samantha had adjusted the seat before disappearing, which made no sense, or someone else had been driving her car. But that wasn't the only disturbing discovery. On Wednesday morning, 3 days after Samantha's disappearance, her Honda Civic was found 16 miles away in the parking lot of an abandoned shopping center on the east side of Beaumont. A maintenance worker discovered it during his morning rounds. The car had been moved from the Wild West Saloon sometime between Saturday night and Wednesday morning. But whoever moved it had been careful to avoid detection. The route between the club and the shopping center included 4 different traffic cameras, but none of them captured clear footage of the Honda being driven. When investigators processed the car at its new location, they found evidence that would haunt the investigation for decades. The vehicle was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. Samantha's nursing textbooks were still in the back seat, along with her clinical paperwork, a half-eaten sandwich from Thursday, and a water bottle with her name written on it in permanent marker. Everything that belonged to Samantha was still there. What didn't belong to her would provide the most chilling clues about what had happened to her. In the glove compartment, investigators discovered a bottle of expensive perfume. The fragrance was Chanel No. 5, retailing for over $100 at department stores. Jennifer Chen was certain that Samantha had never owned anything this expensive. She bought her shampoo at the dollar store, Jennifer told investigators. There's no way she would spend $100 on perfume, even if she had the money, which she didn't. Under the passenger seat, they found a pair of men's leather gloves, size large, with distinctive hand stitching that suggested they were either custom-made or imported. The gloves were expensive, well-maintained, and belonged to no one in Samantha's circle of family and friends. But the most disturbing discovery was in the trunk. Wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a pink ribbon was a small gift box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a medical caduceus charm, appropriate for a nursing student. The bracelet was clearly expensive, probably worth several $100s, but the inscription on the back of the charm would send chills through everyone involved in the investigation. "To Sarah from Mom and Dad, with love and hope for your bright future." Samantha's name was not Sarah. Her parents, Robert and Linda Ward, had not purchased this bracelet. They had never seen it before in their lives. DNA testing of the gift box, tissue paper, and ribbon revealed traces of 2 unknown individuals, one male and one female. The same DNA profiles would be found on the perfume bottle and the leather gloves. The case that had begun as a missing person investigation was now clearly something far more sinister. Detective Kowalski expanded the investigation, bringing in FBI specialists who were experts in abduction cases. The working theory was that Samantha had been taken by the mysterious couple from the Wild West saloon, but proving that theory would require identifying two people who seemed to have vanished as completely as their victim. The security footage from the club became the focus of an intensive analysis. The FBI's facial recognition technology was still primitive in 1998, but investigators distributed still images from the surveillance cameras to every law enforcement agency in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Despite this extensive effort, no credible identifications ever emerged. The mysterious couple had appeared at the Wild West Saloon on May 23rd, had specifically targeted Samantha Ward, and had then disappeared without leaving any trace of their real identities. But investigators did uncover a disturbing pattern that suggested Samantha might not have been their only victim. In the 6 months before Samantha's disappearance, nursing students at 3 different Texas colleges had reported receiving similar mysterious phone calls about job opportunities. In each case, the caller claimed to represent prestigious medical facilities and requested meetings at unusual locations. Most of these students had declined the meetings or had brought friends along when they did agree to meet, but investigators found 2 other cases where young women had agreed to meet the mysterious callers alone. Both of those women had disappeared without a trace. Lisa Chen, a 24-year-old nursing student from Austin, had vanished in February 1998 after agreeing to meet someone about a job opportunity at a restaurant near the university. Her car was found 2 days later in a mall parking lot, with evidence similar to what had been discovered in Samantha's vehicle. Rebecca Martinez, a 22-year-old pre-med student from San Antonio, had disappeared in April 1998 under nearly identical circumstances. She had received a call about a medical school scholarship opportunity, had agreed to meet the caller at a coffee shop, and had never been seen again. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone was systematically targeting young women in medical fields, using job opportunities as bait to lure them to isolated meetings. But despite this expanding investigation, despite FBI involvement, despite extensive media coverage and public appeals for information, the case gradually went cold. By December 1998, with no new leads and no trace of Samantha Ward, the investigation was unofficially suspended. Detective Kowalski had exhausted every avenue, interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, and followed up on dozens of tips that led nowhere. Samantha's parents, Robert and Linda Ward, refused to accept that their daughter was gone forever. They hired private investigators, organized search parties, and maintained a website dedicated to finding Samantha well into the internet age. But as years turned into decades, hope gradually gave way to resignation. Everyone involved in the case assumed that Samantha Ward was dead, even though her body had never been found. The evidence remained preserved in storage, waiting for advances in forensic technology or a breakthrough that might finally provide answers. That breakthrough would come 20 years later in the most unexpected way possible. March 15, 2018. Construction worker Miguel Santos was clearing overgrown vegetation from a lot scheduled for commercial development on the eastern edge of Beaumont. The property had been abandoned for over a decade, slowly being reclaimed by East Texas brush and vines that grew tall enough to completely hide large objects. Santos was operating a brush cutter when his blade struck something solid beneath the vegetation. As he cleared away the overgrowth, he revealed what appeared to be the white roof of a car that had been sitting undisturbed for years. At first, I thought it was just another abandoned vehicle, Santos later told investigators. We find those all the time on these old lots. But as I cleared more brush, I could see this one was different. It was positioned weird, like someone had driven it back there and then covered it up on purpose. The license plate was barely visible under years of accumulated dirt and plant growth. But Santos could make out enough numbers to realize this might be significant. He called the Beaumont Police Department. Detective Maria Rodriguez had been with the department for 12 years, but she had inherited the cold case files when Detective Kowalski retired in 2015. She recognized the license number immediately. This was Samantha Ward's Honda Civic. The car was positioned at the very back of the lot, completely hidden from the road and any casual observation. Someone had deliberately concealed it in the most remote location possible, then allowed nature to finish the job of making it invisible. The Honda's exterior showed 20 years of weather damage, but it was structurally intact. Rust had eaten through some of the body panels, and the tires had long since rotted away, but the vehicle could still potentially yield evidence. Detective Rodriguez arranged for the car to be carefully transported to the police forensics facility, but when investigators tried to open the trunk, they discovered that the release mechanism had been disabled from the inside. This wasn't accidental damage from 20 years of exposure to the elements. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the trunk release to make sure the car couldn't be easily searched if it was ever discovered. Using specialized tools, forensics technicians finally managed to open the rear compartment. What they found inside would answer some questions about Samantha Ward's disappearance while raising even more disturbing possibilities. The trunk contained a small suitcase that definitely hadn't been there during the original investigation in 1998. The suitcase was expensive leather, monogrammed with the initials SM in gold lettering. Inside the suitcase were clothes that belonged to Samantha Ward, including the exact outfit she had been wearing the night she disappeared: a blue cotton blouse, black jeans, and the white sneakers that Jennifer Chen had helped her choose for the supposed job interview. But the condition of these clothes told a story that chilled everyone involved in the investigation. The blouse had been carefully cleaned and folded, but close examination revealed that it had once been torn in multiple places. Someone had mended it with tiny, precise stitches using thread that exactly matched the original fabric. The jeans showed similar evidence of damage and repair. Both garments had been thoroughly cleaned with industrial-strength detergent that had removed all potential DNA evidence. Underneath the clothes, investigators found Samantha's nursing school identification badge, her car keys, and her wallet. The wallet still contained her driver's license and exactly $11.37, the same amount she had been carrying the night she disappeared. But folded inside the wallet's bill compartment was a handwritten note that would transform the entire investigation. Sarah has been a wonderful daughter for 3 years. She adjusted well to her new family and was loved every day. She was never alone, never unloved, never forgotten. Please know that she found peace. The handwriting was feminine, careful, and matched the writing on the gift tag that had been found with the bracelet in 1998. DNA analysis confirmed that the note had been handled by the same unknown woman whose traces had been found 20 years earlier. But the implications of the message were horrifying. Samantha Ward hadn't died in the parking lot of the Wild West Saloon on May 23, 1998. She had been taken by the mysterious couple, held captive for at least 3 years, forced to assume the identity of Sarah, and had lived as their imprisoned daughter until something had finally ended her captivity. The carefully mended clothes suggested that her captors had tried to maintain her dignity and appearance even while holding her against her will. The note indicated that they had developed some twisted form of genuine affection for their victim. But what had ultimately happened to Samantha? Had she died in captivity? Had she escaped? Had her captors decided that their daughter was no longer manageable? Detective Rodriguez expanded the investigation to include every missing person case in the American Southeast that showed similar patterns. She found dozens of cases involving young women in healthcare fields who had disappeared after being approached by older couples offering opportunities. But most shocking of all was what happened next. The breakthrough came not from traditional detective work, but from advances in genealogical DNA analysis that hadn't been available 20 years earlier. The DNA traces found on the evidence from Samantha's car were entered into expanded databases that could identify not just direct matches, but also familial relationships. In August 2018, 5 months after the car's discovery, the DNA analysis yielded a hit. The unknown woman's genetic material matched samples from a cold case in Arkansas that had never been connected to the Texas disappearances. More importantly, the match led investigators to a living relative, a woman in Tennessee, who had been searching for her missing sister for over 2 decades. Margaret Hoffman had disappeared from her family's life in 2001, leaving behind only a cryptic note about starting a new life where no one could find her. Her sister had assumed this meant Margaret was running away from an abusive relationship, but had never stopped wondering what had really happened. When investigators contacted the sister with questions about Margaret Hoffman's DNA profile, they uncovered a family history that would prove crucial to solving the case. Margaret and Charles Hoffman had indeed lost their only daughter in a car accident in 1995. The grief had destroyed Margaret's mental health and had driven Charles to early retirement, from his successful construction business. The sister revealed that Margaret had become obsessed with the idea that their daughter's death wasn't really final, that she could somehow be replaced if they found the right young woman who reminded them of her. Margaret started talking about adopting an adult daughter, the sister told investigators. She said she had met couples who had done this, who had found young women who needed families and had created new relationships. I thought she was just grieving, but now I'm wondering if she meant something much more sinister. Armed with this information, investigators were able to trace the Hoffmans' movements after 1995. They had sold their Texas home and purchased a remote property in Arkansas using cash from Charles's construction business. The property was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and had been extensively modified with additions that weren't reflected in any public building permits. On September 12, 2018, a joint task force involving the FBI, Texas Rangers, and Arkansas State Police executed a search warrant at the former Hoffman property. What they found would validate every suspicion that Linda Ward had developed during 20 years of research. The basement of the main house had been converted into a series of small apartments, each equipped with basic living amenities but no means of communication with the outside world. The windows had been bricked over from the outside, and the doors could only be opened from the corridor. But most chilling of all, each apartment had been decorated to resemble a young woman's bedroom, complete with nursing textbooks, medical school applications, and personal items that appeared to belong to different individuals. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbed soil in multiple locations across the 20-acre property. Careful excavation of these sites would eventually uncover the remains of 7 young women, all of whom had disappeared from different states between 1996 and 2003. Each burial site contained personal effects and handwritten notes from Margaret Hoffman expressing her love for her daughters and her grief at losing them when they tried to leave the family. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of what had happened to Samantha and the other victims. They had been kidnapped, held in the basement apartments, and gradually psychologically conditioned to accept their roles as replacement daughters for the Hoffmans' deceased child. But the notes found at the burial sites revealed a pattern of escalating instability in Margaret Hoffman's mental state. As the years passed, she became increasingly paranoid about her captive daughters trying to escape or contact their original families. When Charles Hoffman died of a stroke in 2002, Margaret had apparently decided that she could no longer maintain the complex deception required to keep multiple captives. One by one, she had killed the young women she had claimed to love as daughters. Samantha Ward's remains were found in the location that corresponded with the 2002 date on Margaret Hoffman's note. She had been one of the last victims to die, surviving in captivity for nearly 4 years before her life was ended by the woman who had claimed to be saving her. The discovery of the burial sites brought closure to 7 families who had been searching for their daughters for decades. But it also revealed the true scope of what had been one of the most sophisticated and long-running serial abduction operations in American criminal history. Robert Ward, now 71 and in poor health, was able to visit his daughter's burial site before her remains were released to the family. Standing in the Arkansas forest where Samantha had spent her final years, he finally understood why none of his weekend searches in Texas had ever yielded any clues. "I was looking hundreds of miles away from where she actually was," he told Detective Rodriguez. "All those years, all those weekends, I never even got close." Linda Ward's reaction was different. The validation of her research felt hollow in the face of learning that her daughter had died just 4 years after the abduction. "If I had been smarter, if I had connected the right clues, maybe I could have found her in time," Linda said during the press conference announcing the resolution of the case. 4 years isn't 20 years. There might have been time to save her. But investigators emphasized that Linda's work had been crucial to solving not just Samantha's case, but multiple related abductions that might never have been connected without her decades of research. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, who had coordinated the multi-state investigation, credited Linda Ward with developing insights about serial abduction patterns that were years ahead of law enforcement's understanding. Mrs. Ward identified connections between cases that our databases completely missed, Agent Walsh explained. Her research methodology and her understanding of how these perpetrators operated was more sophisticated than what most police departments were using in the 1990s and early 2000s. The press coverage of the Hoffman case led to dozens of additional tips and potential connections to other missing persons cases. Linda's database, which had been dismissed for years as the obsessive work of a grieving mother, became the foundation for a federal task force dedicated to identifying and investigating serial abduction networks. Margaret Hoffman was eventually located in a memory care facility in Tennessee, where she had been placed by distant relatives who were completely unaware of her criminal history. At 87 years old and suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease, she was unable to stand trial for her crimes. She died in federal custody in 2019, never having provided any additional information about the locations of other potential victims or the identities of people who might have assisted in the abduction operation. But her death did not end the investigation. The FBI task force continued to use Linda Ward's research to investigate dozens of potentially related cases across the Southeast. By 2020, the investigation had linked the Hoffmans to at least 15 disappearances across 7 states, making them responsible for one of the largest serial killing operations in modern American history. Robert Ward died in January 2020, 18 months after learning the truth about his daughter's fate. His funeral was attended by dozens of volunteers who had joined him on his weekend searches over the years, and by families of other missing persons who had found comfort in his refusal to give up hope. Linda Ward, now 71, continues to work with the FBI task force and maintains her database of missing persons cases. The Samantha Ward Missing Persons Foundation has evolved into a national resource for families of missing adults, providing both practical assistance and emotional support for people facing similar tragedies. In 2021, Linda was honored by the National Center for Missing Adults for her contributions to the field of missing persons research, but she has always maintained that her work was never about recognition or vindication. "I just wanted to find my daughter," she said in her acceptance speech. "Everything else that came from that search was just what happened along the way." The Wild West Saloon, where this nightmare began on a warm May night in 1998, was demolished in 2019 after sitting empty for several years. In its place stands a medical training center that provides free healthcare education to students from low-income families. A memorial garden beside the building honors Samantha Ward and the 6 other victims of the Hoffman abductions. Each spring, nursing students from local colleges plant flowers in the garden and participate in a ceremony remembering young women whose dreams of helping others were stolen by people who saw their compassion as vulnerability. On September 3, 2018, 6 months after the discovery of the Honda Civic, Detective Rodriguez received a phone call that would change everything. A woman identifying herself as Sarah Mitchell had seen news coverage of the Samantha Ward case and claimed to have information that might help the investigation. Rodriguez agreed to meet with Mitchell at the police station, expecting to interview another witness or someone with peripheral knowledge about the case. But when Sarah Mitchell walked into the interview room, Detective Rodriguez immediately noticed something that made her pulse quicken. This woman, who appeared to be in her early 40s, bore a striking resemblance to the age-progressed photos that had been created to show what Samantha Ward might look like after 20 years. And when Sarah Mitchell began to speak, she made a claim that seemed impossible. She said she was Samantha Ward. According to Mitchell's account, the couple who had approached Samantha at the Wild West Saloon were Charles and Margaret Hoffman, a wealthy, childless couple in their 60s who had lost their only daughter in a car accident in 1995. Unable to cope with their grief, the Hoffmans had developed an elaborate delusion that they could replace their deceased daughter by kidnapping young women who reminded them of her. They specifically targeted women in medical fields because their daughter had been studying to become a nurse when she died. Samantha had been taken from the club's parking lot at gunpoint, driven to a remote property in Arkansas, and held in a converted basement apartment that had been designed to house a captive. For nearly 4 years, according to Mitchell's account, she had lived as the Hoffmans' prisoner, gradually psychologically conditioned to accept her role as their daughter Sarah. She had been treated well physically, provided with books and correspondence courses, and allowed to continue her medical education through distance learning programs. But she had never been allowed to leave the property, to contact her original family, or to acknowledge her real identity. She had existed in a bizarre state of enforced adoption, treated as a beloved daughter while being held completely against her will. In 2002, Charles Hoffman had suffered a massive stroke and died. Margaret Hoffman, overwhelmed by grief and unable to maintain the complex deception alone, had eventually made a devastating decision. Rather than release Samantha, she had decided that if she couldn't keep her captive daughter, then no one could. On a cold February morning in 2002, Margaret Hoffman had given Samantha what she claimed was cold medicine for a respiratory infection. But the medication had been a fatal overdose of prescription painkillers. Samantha Ward had died in captivity 4 years after her abduction, at the age of 27. But Sarah Mitchell's story didn't end there. She claimed to be Rebecca Martinez, the pre-med student who had disappeared from San Antonio in April 1998. She had been the Hoffman's second victim, taken just weeks before Samantha's abduction. According to Mitchell, she had witnessed Samantha's murder and had spent the next 16 years living in constant fear that Margaret Hoffman would eventually kill her too. She had finally escaped in 2018 when her captor, now in her 80s, had been placed in a nursing home by distant relatives who were unaware of her crimes. Detective Rodriguez was initially skeptical of Mitchell's claims, but DNA testing confirmed the impossible. Sarah Mitchell was indeed Rebecca Martinez, the missing pre-med student from San Antonio. This confirmation opened the most complex and disturbing criminal investigation in Texas history. If Mitchell's account was accurate, the Hoffmans had operated a sophisticated kidnapping operation for years, targeting multiple victims and maintaining a remote prison facility where they held young women captive. Working with FBI specialists and forensic anthropologists, investigators located the Arkansas property that Mitchell described. The current owners had purchased it from Margaret Hoffman's estate in 2018 and had no knowledge of its previous use. Excavation of the basement area revealed the hidden apartment where victims had been held. More importantly, they found evidence of multiple occupants over several years. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbed soil in several areas of the property. Careful excavation of these sites uncovered the remains of 4 young women, including Samantha Ward. Each victim had been buried with personal items and notes from Margaret Hoffman expressing her love for her captive daughters and her grief at losing them. The Hoffman case became one of the most complex serial abduction investigations in American criminal history, involving victims from 5 different states and spanning nearly a decade. Margaret Hoffman was eventually located in a memory care facility in Tennessee, but she was suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease and was unable to stand trial for her crimes. She died in custody in 2019, taking most of the details of her crimes with her. For the families of the victims, the resolution of the case brought both relief and new grief. After 20 years of hoping their daughters might still be alive, they finally had answers, but those answers confirmed their worst fears. Samantha Ward's parents, now in their 70s, held a funeral service for their daughter in May 2019, exactly 21 years after her disappearance. The nursing school class that Samantha should have graduated with in 1998 attended the service, finally able to say goodbye to their missing classmate. The Wild West Saloon, where this nightmare had begun, closed permanently in 2019. The building was demolished to make way for a medical center that provides free healthcare services to students and low-income families. A memorial plaque near the entrance reads, "In memory of Samantha Ward and all the young women whose dreams were stolen by those who saw their hope as vulnerability. May their ambition to heal others live on in the work we do here." Rebecca Martinez, now permanently known as Sarah Mitchell, has become a victim advocate specializing in long-term abduction cases. She works with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify patterns that might indicate similar crimes. She still drives a white Honda Civic, though she always keeps the gas tank full. She still avoids crowded bars and dance halls, and she still feels uncomfortable when strangers offer help. But she is free, she is alive, and she has transformed her years of captivity into a source of strength that helps other survivors find their way back to the world. Today, when young women ask strangers for help getting home safely, Sarah Mitchell hopes they remember Samantha Ward's story. She hopes they remember that evil often wears a helpful smile, that predators seek out vulnerability, and that the most dangerous people are sometimes those who offer exactly what we need most. But most of all, she hopes they remember that even in the darkest circumstances, even after years of captivity and trauma, the human spirit can find a way to survive, to escape, and to transform suffering into a force for protecting others. Samantha Ward's dream of saving lives as a nurse was stolen from her at the age of 23. But her story continues to save lives today, reminding us all to be vigilant, to be careful, and to never take our freedom for granted. The nursing student who asked for help getting home from a dance hall became a cautionary tale that protects countless others. Her legacy lives on in every young woman who makes it home safely, in every parent who teaches their children about the dangers that hide behind helpful offers, and in every survivor who finds the courage to reclaim their life from those who tried to steal it. This is the story of Samantha Ward, a young woman whose dreams were destroyed by evil, but whose memory continues to protect others from the same fate.